So I have a little something to share with you guys, and I've actually had this this revelation, this word, this wisdom, this knowledge, this something for a while. I just haven't shared it. It's just such a cool story and just a cool example of how God is like a maestro. He creates the coolest symphonies and weaves things together so beautifully. There have been so many examples of my own life, and I'm sure there's tons of examples of your life too. But today I want to walk you through a symphony that I discovered in the Bible probably about a year ago, and it just moved me in such a different way. And God just continues to blow me away all the time. I do need to put a little bit of a trigger warning on this though. There is going to be a portion of the story that may be difficult for some people to hear or digest. There is a mention of essay in this. It is a Bible story. This is just for educational purposes only. Please share this video if you feel moved to, or if you know somebody that this might help or who may enjoy this study of words. I pray that this falls on the ears of those who need to hear it. I love the story of Deborah in the Bible. You may know her as Deborah. Same thing. Tomato. But you can find her story in Judges 4 and Judges 5. The cool thing about Deborah is she was the only female judge that is recorded in the Bible over Israel. And you may know that they had judges before they had a king. So the judge was kind of like the leader of the nation of Israel. They were responsible for settling disputes, holding court. They were the commander-in-chief basically. So they were the go-to person. So like the commander of the Israelite army answered to the judge at the time, since they didn't have kings. So I want you to sit tight on Deborah, and I'm gonna circle back to her in a little bit. But first I wanna share two stories with you of two women in the Bible who are not talked about often. So these two women share the same name, Tamar. The interesting thing about these women is even though they are identified by name in the Bible, their stories are kind of like tucked away and hidden. And by that I mean that they are literally sandwiched in between other stories that are going on. So we're going to talk about the first Tamar. I'm going to call her Tamar number 1. She was the daughter-in-law of Judah, and her story is found all the way back in Genesis 38. Her story is sandwiched in between the story of Joseph. So if you're reading through Genesis, you may have never heard her story or really paid much attention to it, because when you're around this section of Genesis, we're mostly talking about Joseph and everything that was happening to him. His brothers had just sold him to the Midianites, and the Midianites had then sold him to Potiphar. The interesting thing is about this story is Joseph's brothers all wanted to kill him out of their jealousy, and Judah was the one who stood up and said like, hey, we can't do this, like we can't kill him. So they decided to sell him into slavery instead. After the story of Tamar, it jumps right back into Joseph's story, and he's now at Potiphar's house, and the whole entire situation with Potiphar's wife occurs. You're probably familiar with those two stories that I just mentioned, but that's not why we're here. Let's talk about Tamar. So Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah. Judah had 3 sons with a Canaanite woman. His oldest son, was the one who was originally wed to Tamar, and all the Bible tells us about is that he was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, so his life had to end. According to the law of Moses, when a woman is widowed and she hasn't given birth to any children, there is a redeemer kinsman of the family. You may recognize this from the story of Ruth and Boaz, who is like the next in line. They will then marry the woman and have children with her, and those children will be under her original husband's name, so that his family line isn't ended. So it's kind of a way to honor that person and to help protect the inheritance of the people of Israel. So Judah's second son, Onan, forgive me if I'm just butchering these names, but like, come on. Unless you're like fluent in Hebrew, are any of us really saying them right? Onan was then given Tamar as his wife to reconcile Er's lineage. Now, Onan did not want to honor his brother. Like literally, he did not want to have children with Tamar and then have those children attributed to his brother. He didn't want his own lineage to kind of like be wiped out. So the really messed up thing about Onan is he accepted Tamar and he was willing to lie down with Tamar, but he was not willing to get her pregnant. In the Bible, it literally says that he spilled his seed on the ground, deliberately trying to not get Tamar pregnant. In the eyes of the Lord, this was wicked. So the Lord also, remember what God told Adam and Eve all the way back in the very beginning, be fruitful and multiply. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I think it's a little bit deeper than him just spilling his seed. I think It was wicked in lots of ways. He wasn't honoring his brother. He was more than willing to have sex with her, but he wasn't honoring her at the same time. He was using her. So now 2 out of 3 of Judah's sons have passed away. Onan, and Shelah is still remaining. Judah, however, is now kind of like filled with fear. He feels like it's Tamar's fault that his sons keep dying. So he tells her to go back to your father, live as a widow, and then when Shelah grows up and is old enough, then you can have him as your husband. But secretly, Judah was scared. He didn't want Shelah to die also. The next thing we know, we don't know exactly how much time has passed, but we do know it's been a pretty good chunk of time. Judah's wife then passes away. And once he's kind of dealt with the mourning and the grief from that, he takes the sheep to another town to have them sheared. This town actually is where Tamar is now living with her father as a widowed woman. So Tamar was somehow alerted that Judah was coming to handle this business, and she takes off her widow's garments, veils her face as a way to like disguise herself. She doesn't want to be identified. She goes and like waits for Judah to pass by. And so Judah sees her, but unfortunately for him, he doesn't recognize her. She doesn't know that she is his daughter-in-law. So he literally goes up to her and approaches her as a prostitute, like, hey, I want to have sex with you. Like, come on, let's go. And she agrees. But she is a smart woman, and she asks him to make a pledge to prove that he will actually send the payment to her. So then Tamar and Judah, who is her father-in-law, go off and make babies. No, literally, they make babies. Tamar becomes pregnant from her encounter with Judah. So a few months go by, and Judah is given a message that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, who is supposed to be a widow, is now acting as a prostitute. Now Judah is blaming her for bringing shame upon the family line. She's supposed to be his son's widow. She is supposed to be kind of like living a life of solitude back in her father's home. Definitely not supposed to be out having sex with other men and getting pregnant, and definitely not supposed to be a prostitute. And wouldn't you know, good old Judah says that she needs to be burned alive. That's his solution for her getting pregnant. Once Judah gets back to Tamar's town and they drag her out and they're getting ready to take her, she kind of yells amongst the crowd like, hey, the father of my children, these things belong to him. Hey Judah, do you know who these belong to? And Judah immediately recognized them as his belongings. And Judah ends up in the end calling her righteous for what she did. That Tamar was more righteous than him because he was being deceitful and keeping his youngest son from her, and in turn not honoring her out of fear. From that encounter with Judah, Tamar gave birth to twins. One of them's name is Perez. And just, because lineage is fun and this story is super important, Perez eventually down his family line becomes Boaz, and then further down the family line becomes King David, and then further down family line comes Joseph. You can read more about the genealogy in the opening of Luke. So what are some takeaways from Tamar's story? Well, she was completely taken advantage of and used by the men of Judah, literally Judah and his sons. She was sexually abused by Onan, the second son of Judah. He was still having sex with her and using her, but was deliberately not getting her pregnant, which was really the only reason that he should have been having sex with her in the first place. Then Judah sends her away and deceives her, lies to her, telling her that she will get the youngest son, but out of fear, doesn't allow it to happen. So she takes matters into her own hands, and in an act of self-preservation, so that she is not seen as a woman of shame, she ends up having sex with Judah and then gets pregnant from the encounter. Then Judah wants her to be burned to death for getting pregnant. Lo and behold, it was actually Judah that got her pregnant. And can we just talk about how Judah wanted her burned alive because she was accused of being a prostitute, but he himself sought out the comfort of a prostitute? No offense, guys, but seriously? It's a good time to point out that if Tamar had not done what she did with Judah, we wouldn't have ever gotten Jesus. Anyway, let's move on to Tamar number 2. Tamar number 2 is actually one of the daughters of King David. She's the only female child of David's that's named. His sons are all named and the mothers that they came from, but Tamar is the only female. You can find out about her story in 2 Samuel 13. Now, her story is wedged in with a whole bunch of family drama that's going on with King David. This one is the one that's really going to need a trigger warning. You may feel that this story is a little bit graphic. And if you've been in this type of situation, you're going to understand the encounter. This one actually, I hate hearing about this portion of King David's life through pastors and churches. I'm just going to be fully 100% transparent here. I feel like they are constantly skipping over the story of Tamar. I don't blame them. It's disturbing. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to focus on the violence between David's sons and how the kingdom was almost uprooted and how his son turned on him. And yeah, all that stuff happened and all that stuff was horrible. But this was probably even worse. And if this situation had not occurred, the rest of it probably wouldn't have happened either. Anyway, let's get into it. Tamar, number 2, the daughter of King David. David had several wives. Her full-blooded sibling was Absalom. Her half-brother Ammon fell in love with her. Try not to think about this in 2023 standards. Remember, this was a really long time ago and things were just different back then, okay? But Ammon didn't have like the normal puppy dog type of love for her. Ammon was obsessed with her. And the Bible tells us he was so completely in love with her that it made him sick, that he was frustrated to the point of illness over Tamar. That's how madly in love with her he was. And I'm not saying madly lightly. Dude was obsessed with her. As you read on into the story, you see there's definitely a spirit there that was making things not okay in that household. He was probably like a narcissist. With the encouragement of his friend, Ammon pretends to actually be sick and request that King David sends Tamar to him to prepare him food, to feed him, to kind of like help him get better. Basically like be his nurse. I'm sure there were plenty of servants in that kingdom that could have done that job, but Ammon specifically requested that it was Tamar, and he requested it from the king, and the king loves his son, so of course he sent her. Ammon literally says that he wanted to watch Tamar prepare the food for him, and then he wanted to eat it out of her hand. He literally wanted her to feed it to him. Put a pin in that because that's going to be relevant later. Ammon wanted all of her attention. And not only that, he wanted to give all of his attention to her. Just by the fact that he wanted to watch her prepare it. He didn't want her to prepare the food at her own, living quarter. He wanted her to be in his presence, doing everything in front of him so that he could just, in his obsession, watch her and then have her feed it to him. So Tamar did what she was sent down there to do. She thought she was going to nurse her half-brother, back to health and just make him feel better. But when she got there and she finished preparing the food, so think of it this way. Ammon is literally watching her do all of these things, becoming more and more obsessed with her in this time. When somebody is infatuated with you and they are just fully focused on you, it's like their infatuation grows. Tamar is in a place where she's just doing what she was told to do. She's trying to help. He refused to eat the food that she prepared, but when she was close enough to try to feed it to him, he ends up grabbing her. The rest of the time is actually really disturbing because you can see how Tamar begged him not to go through with what he was doing to her. And she gave every reason that she could to kind of remind him of the evil that he was about to do. She begged him not to force her. She reminded him that this type of thing should not exist in Israel. This is a level of evil and wickedness that should not be amongst their people. She reminds him of, if you do this to me, you're going to ruin my reputation. I am going to be a soiled woman. I will never be able to be given in marriage. You are taking away my purity from me right now. I'm going to be shamed forever. She even tried to go as far as to convince him to marry her. Let's go to the king. He will let us get married. He loves you. He'll allow this thing to happen. She tried literally everything, and Ammon was having none of it. He didn't want any of that. He didn't want to do things the right way. He didn't want to protect her. He didn't want to honor her. He wanted what he wanted right now, and he was going to take it. And he did. And the Bible tells us he was so strong that he overpowered her, and he raped her. But the worst part might have come after this. Once everything was over, remember that Ammon was frustrated by his love to the point of illness. But after the act was over, it says that Ammon hated her, and he hated her more than he loved her. I don't know if you've ever experienced that level of passion before. It's intense and it can be scary. Ammon immediately tried to throw Tamar out of his home, and he even went so far as to call his servants to come help remove her. Come get her out of here. I don't want her here anymore. I despise this woman. She makes me sick. Because of what he did to her. Obviously, this caused Tamar to go into a deep mourning, as it would for any woman. The royal family or people of wealth or just a certain status had identifying clothing that they wore. Tamar, after this incident, removed all of her royal clothing, all of the clothing that labeled her as a pure woman, a virgin, someone that would be well to marry King David's daughter. She went and lived with her brother Absalom at this point, and she just went into a deep depression. I can't say for sure, but the way that I read it is she never recovered from it. And this infuriated Absalom, that his sister was destroyed in that manner. She was living, but she was no longer who she was. After this happened, Absalom actually went and killed Amnon, and then this huge war started within David's household. That's another story for another day. I want to stay focused on the women, the Tamars. If you know me at all, you know that I love words. I love to understand the meaning of words. I love to study, especially Hebrew. I love how God is so passionate about words also. When you start to study words, you can start to read the Bible in a different way. God is very precise in the things that he says and the names that he gives people. And there's several references in the Bible of where God has said, like, hey, you're gonna have a baby and this is what you need to name that child. And I believe that that's true today. I believe that people's names carry a lot of weight. I believe that your name says a lot about who you are, your identity, how the Lord formed you. But most importantly, I truly believe that your name can lead you to your calling and your purpose and why you're here. Real quick, I just want to say there is actually a third woman named Tamar in the Bible, but we don't know much about her. The only thing that we know was that she was the daughter of Absalom. So this was kind of a way for Absalom to kind of like avenge what happened to his sister. When he had a daughter, he named her Tamar to honor her. And the Bible tells us that she was beautiful, but that's really all we know about her. So according to Strong's, the name Tamar means palm tree. Hang tight, stick with me here. Now I'm going to tie this back in with Deborah. So both of the Tamars were abused, disregarded, sexually assaulted, abandoned, both physically and emotionally, to all of those things. However, a little bit later on down the line, we are given Deborah, the most awesome female judge in all of Israel. Probably because she's the only one. But Deborah was a very strong woman. She's the commander-in-chief, basically. Like, the commander of the army answers to Deborah. She is the leader of Israel. There were no kings at that time. Her role as judge was the equivalent to a king. She was a prophet. She was a wife. She was highly honored and regarded amongst her people. Now, the cool thing about Deborah is she held court underneath a palm tree. So any judgment, anytime there was a problem with the people, anytime something needed to be done or ruled upon within the nation of Israel, the people would come to Deborah and she would hold court underneath her palm tree. At this time, the Bible says, once again, the Israelites were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he had handed them over to Sisera. This was a time where Sisera was oppressing the people of Israel. Deborah summoned Barak, who was the commander of the army at the time, and let him know, like, hey, this is what's going on and this is what the Lord wants you to do. God's already gone ahead of you. He's already cleared the way. His spirit is there for you. You need to go and handle this. And Barak was like, yeah, of course I'll go, but I'm only going to go if you go. That's how highly regarded Deborah was. Deborah was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I'll go with you. However, because of what you're doing, cowardice, the Lord is going to deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. This is where things really start to tie together and really start to get interesting here. So we have these women who are misused, abused, mistreated, disregarded, abandoned in the Bible. And their name means palm tree. What is a palm tree? A palm tree is strong. According to the Bible, a palm tree is described as flourishing, which means that it's prosperous. It produces lots of fruit. The really cool thing about palm trees is that they are always upright, meaning that they never bow down. They always stand strong. They may sway and bend in the wind, but they're not going anywhere. They're going to stand their ground. Palm branch often symbolizes victory, triumph, peace, eternal life. When soldiers would return from war, they were given a victory crown that was made of palm leaves and palm branches. When Jesus was entering Jerusalem, palms were laid down on the pathway. It's so cool and just shows 100% who God is, that he would redeem these two women who were physically and sexually abused by another woman who would deliver justice under the meaning of their name. Tamar means palm tree, and Deborah delivered justice while sitting underneath a palm tree. She also made it very clear that the saving of Israel was going to come through the hands of a woman. There are lots of other ways that we can go into that story, and we can talk more about the twins that Tamar #1 gave birth to, but we'll save all of that for another day. I'm really just here to tell you and remind you that God will use anything and everything for your good and for his glory. It's so beautiful and so amazing how he redeemed these women by just allowing another woman to be ruler and judge underneath what their name represented. God is so amazing. I would love to help you dissect your name if that's something that you're interested in. But you know I love words, and I really look forward to making more videos like these and kind of going through everybody's names with you. And I'll probably do another video breaking down Deborah's name also, and how that ties into this story and other stories as well. Really, even her own story if you think about it. So I hope this little bit of wisdom will fall on the ears that it needs to fall on. I hope it does something for you. I hope it moves your spirit in a way and reminds you that God loves you no matter what has happened to you, no matter what you've been through. There's always, always a way that he is going to redeem you, your name, and your honor. He hasn't forgotten about you. He knows. God is awesome. I don't really know what else to say. Like, I kind of feel like stuck on that ending, but hey, thanks for the chat. Love you all. See you next time.